There are so many painting techniques in the world, and I'm here to tell you that most of them are wasting your time. This sounds dramatic at first, but let me assure you that you can use just one technique, and if you master it, you don't really have to use anything else ever again. Hi, I'm Simon, also known as Zumikito, and I paint miniatures for a living. And in this video, I'm gonna explain how anyone can make this technique work, why it's better than pretty much every other painting approach, and how you can use it to either paint better or faster, depending on what you want. But first, let me explain why you don't need any complicated painting techniques that you see on YouTube or anywhere else. And to give you an example, you might remember how I painted this Eldar miniature with mostly wet blending. And wet blending can be a great technique, but it can also be your biggest waste of time. You see, it's true that wet blending might be fast, but only if you know how to do it right. To wet blend, you essentially mix two colors when they are wet on a miniature and create a seamless gradient. In theory, this is really quick. However, you have to know how much paint to apply. You have to act fast, and even if it seems correct, chances are there is gonna be some texture. And those are some things that can happen even if you're experienced. So what is the better alternative? Well, let me show you on this beautiful miniature from Kingdom Death. The first thing I painted was the gold helmet, as it illustrates the approach I take pretty well. And the first thing I did, unsurprisingly, is base coat it with a dark brown color. Basically, there is a pre-existing color scheme that I wanna use, and the helmet is gonna be gold. For the first layer, I am using Japanese brown. A real fun feature of gold is that some shades include green, and some include orange. So you'll see both in this case. And I guess you already see what the hell am I doing here. All I do is layering. Now, while this might sound like a total basic bitch answer, most people actually don't know how to layer properly, or just straight up underestimate this technique. When I tell you that 95% of what I do on my minis is layering, I am not kidding. The most important thing to keep in mind is that you gotta know where to put your layers, and then knowing how much paint is in your layers. As you see me work on the mini, you'll see that I start with layers that cover most of the surface. Notice how the layer doesn't cover the surface in one go. This is a feature, not a bug. That way, you can reapply the same layer inside of what you painted, but cover slightly less than before. And that way, you leave some of that translucent layer visible, which makes a softer transition. And if you really want to make it soft, just thin down the layer even more and drag your brush from the shade into the reflection. Like that, you can simply continue with all of your layers. But, and this is crucial, make sure that you are always covering less and less with every additional layer. The previous layers will serve as a transition for what you put on top. Now, if you repeat this step multiple times and always keep some of the previous layers visible, you'll have a really nice result in the end. On this gold helmet, it took me like around 5 to 6 layers, and I think it looks really good. At the end, I also put on top some very thin layers of orange over the secondary reflections at the back of the helmet, so it has more of that gold impression. And the same process can be used for literally anything. The red cloth around her waist was base coated first, then I simply put on top another layer that's a bit lighter and covered less than before. Then I did it again and again, covering less and less, while aiming my brushstrokes towards where the light is supposed to be. By the way, if you are wondering how I knew where to paint the reflections on the cloth or the helmet, for example, I have a great universal tutorial for that on my Patreon. That's exactly about this topic. You'll also find there the unedited footage for this model. So if that sounds interesting, check it out. So anyway, you might be asking, why is this particular approach better than any other painting technique? And the answer is more simple than it seems. While techniques like wet blending, loaded brush, overbrushing, or anything else really give you the impression of being fast, it's the layering which gives you much better control. And ultimately, it can be still pretty damn fast. This simple gradient on the booth plate took me about 5 minutes. It was a matter of applying 4 different layers, always covering less as I approached the middle. As it was almost complete, I decided to blend it a little bit more by applying a few glazes. Wait, glazes? Get that shit out of here! We are only using thin layers. Stippling? You mean a layer that's applied with a stabbing motion? See, it's all kinda the same, just the motion is different. Whatever we do, we are applying layers in a different way. We use either thicker layers to sketch or thinner layers for their translucent properties. There is no need to overcomplicate it. I don't use any washes, no dry brushing, overbrushing or anything like that. It's all in the simple layers which you can apply with high control and precision. Okay, but is this approach able to give you better results than other techniques? If you give it enough time, you can very easily paint something that looks fantastic. At that point, it's only a matter of how many layers you wanna apply. If you are willing to paint 5, 6, or even more than 7 layers the way I described, in the end you'll have a very refined result. Okay, but can it be faster? It really doesn't matter what you paint. If you want faster result and you don't want to paint like 7 different layers, just paint less. You still have more control over the paint and chances of creating texture are much lower over the other aforementioned techniques. For example, the hair on this miniature was painted exactly that way. Instead of applying 5+ layers like I did on the X, I just applied 3 different layers, and it's more than enough really. Like, it's always a good idea to refine the stuff you care about, and the not so important bits can be more sketched. It also works for the hair in particular, because I wanted more pronounced reflections on quite a small surface. Basically, if the part that you paint is small enough and you apply enough layers, you don't have to use thinner layers in between to blend it. Another example of this are these little golden sleeves. I think I used like 3 to 4 layers and that's it, because it's not like people would see the harshness on these little bits. So if you're thinking that you need something special to achieve outstanding results, you really don't. Sometimes it's just about the basics and your patience. However, all of this will be completely useless if you are not careful enough to not make certain mistakes. And I talk about that in this video, so if you wanna avoid these, check it out. And see you there!